Okay, bit of housekeeping first up. Looking at the quality of the videos and the sound and even the captions, and use the captions, I recommend. It's not great that production values are poor. I'll try and consolidate the NAA videos, clean them up a bit and replace them effectively, and then I'll move on to the TRS videos. So look, that distinction's not very strong. I'm just using TRS to distinguish what I'm doing in the transcendental space. So watch this space, and look, while we're at it, let's talk about space. When I use the word, it's not metaphorical. Of course, the language is strongly metaphorical, so of course the language of it has that, what Derrida would call metaphoricity, so that quality of metaphor, but that's not the whole of the story. I would like to just point out that a space is like a space between two people, for example. In short, a relationship, but the point is that it's neither particularly empirical, it's not particularly metaphorical, but it is, when you say space in the way that I intend it, it's a generalization to the roundabout area in which issues or topics are discussed. So if I'm talking about a Kantian space, that's going to be a space in which Kant developed within subjectivity a way of talking about objectively, talking about the structure of the mind. Now he's doing this because the mind alone does not access reality in an immediate way. However, it is engaged in something, insofar as I've noted before that brain produces, at a very basic level, brain produces reality. Now we know this to be so because we don't have experience that is verifiable in a not just objective sense, but in a way that doesn't use brain. So we always already have brain identifying reality. Now these days, modernity, science, you've got instruments to do certain things. So I realise that that argument about brains being the mediator is diminishing in its value as a position to hold. However, we still have a relationship with the instruments, but I'm not going to dwell on that, because that's, in a certain sense, that would be what I would view as just being clever about it. That you're always humanising. I don't particularly, even though I'll emphasise subjectivism, I don't want to be always subjectivising. Kant didn't set it up that way, and we should follow his lead in that sense. So, referring to space, and look, empirical space, actual space that we move about in, and that we identify as the physical world, including beyond the planet, I suppose. That physical space is referred to in the transcendental philosophy as empirical, and bound up with what that brain does in terms of sensory input and thereafter some form of processing. But strictly the space that's the sensory input is in the brain too. So there's that difficulty again. I'm not dwelling on that. I just want to point out, one, metaphoricity and sort of an ideal space. Look, talking about it's very difficult because you're in idealism, yet I'm trying to say, hey, this space is not necessarily ideal. So for Kant, strictly it is what's called transcendentally ideal, and then what with the ordinary world or the ordinary space is called empirically real. So there's this pair that go together. On the subject side is the transcendentally ideal, and on the object side is the empirically real. But sticking to the former first, the transcendentally ideal, I want to take that conception of space. Remember, he's bracketed off actual space. He said that, well, at least at his time, the metaphysical view of space, he set that aside. And he said that he did that because he wants to, or his claim is that space is a transcendental condition, first of all, even though there's empirical elements, but that's not the whole of the story of space. So this is important to keep in mind, that when he brackets off metaphysics, he's includes bracketing a metaphysical concept of space. So you don't just do metaphysics, and metaphysics is always about something, typically objects, and so in that instance it's the space as object or similar that's bracketed off, and he introduces this idea that you could speak of space in terms of it being the condition of the possibility of experience, which is the other side. So it being a quality of the subject that produces the objective experience. So it goes on and on like that, but the reason I'm using space in the way that I am is to develop that idea that one, it's there, two, it's not just metaphorical, and it's, importantly, we don't have to say that it's ideal. We can distinguish the ideal from the transcendental, because the transcendental, remember, is a subjective element. Not subjective as in could be right, could be wrong, but an element of subjectivity. Anyway, I'll continue along those lines. I just want it to be clear about that space in which he is talking about how the mind necessarily works. So we're deep into the necessity, as Kant sees it, of what's called the conditions of experience. That is, you need a mind to experience, of course. But what is it about that mind, like formally, that would satisfy an assessment that says we're capturing the mind and the way that it operates? So it's quite a formal structure of the mind by Kant. But keep in mind, probably within 120 years or something, you can't recall the dates exactly, you've got the simple intellectual turn on your heels and say, well, that's just all psychology what you're doing. You're just producing these concepts that you say are connected to our thinking or our brain function that is somehow in the background, and that's all very good, but end of the day it's psychology. But that also turns on the fact that even though Kant gives you a language to talk about it, you don't quite get into that other area, the behind the scenes of the mind. But he does give you lots of kind of language, particularly around what would be pure, so no kind of influence from the empirical, so you can talk about only that part of the mind, and a whole bunch of language and concepts and connections that he relies on to present effectively transcendentalism, which is a form of subjectivism. Okay, and that doesn't displace or exclude other forms of subjectivism, which, I probably only touched on having focused on Kant so much now. Okay.